The locksmith arrived at 7 on a gray morning, and I knew before he set down his case that the realm I had served for 31 years was already gone. I had stood the Saints' Gate of Harrowgate Palace through 4 winters of my apprenticeship and 27 as a sworn man of the King's Guard of Eldermoor, and in all that time I had learned to read a morning the way a farmer reads a sky. A morning could carry rain in it long before a cloud showed. It could carry a death, or a birth, or a state visit, or nothing at all, and the difference lived in small things. The angle of the undergroom's shoulders, the number of black cars on the outer drive, the particular silence of the kitchens when bad news had reached them first. That morning carried something I had never read before, and I had read a great many. It carried the end of a thing. The locksmith was a square, unhurried man in a plain gray coat, and he was escorted by 2 people I did not recognize, which was itself remarkable, because after 3 decades I knew the face of nearly everyone permitted to walk the inner court before the public gates opened. The 2 strangers wore the dark, well-cut clothes of the Crown's own service, and they carried themselves like people who had been given an authority that very week, and meant to use every ounce of it before anyone could take it back. One of them held a folded paper sealed with the green wax of the Lord Chamberlain's office. The other held a printed list. They walked toward the Chamberlain's stair, and the locksmith walked behind them with his case, and not one of the 3 so much as glanced at me, the still red figure at the Saints' Gate, because to them I was furniture. A handsome old fixture of the palace. A man who did not move. I did not move. That is the whole of my craft, and I will not pretend it is small. But behind the stillness of my face, my mind had begun to run, the way it had been trained to run while the body stood as a stone, and it ran toward a single fact. In 31 years, no one had ever changed the locks of Harrowgate Palace. Repaired them, yes. Oiled them, replaced a worn ward, cut a fresh key for a new understeward. But never changed them, never struck off the old patterns wholesale and fitted new iron in a single morning, the way a man changes the locks on a house when he no longer trusts the people who hold the keys. You do that only when the keys have gone to hands you mean to lock out forever. My name is Tomas Vael, and I was at that time the senior man of the Saints' Gate Watch, 53 years old, with a back that ached in the cold and a memory that did not fail me, which in our service is worth more than a straight back. I tell you my name because in the hours that followed I came to understand that names, who holds them, who keeps them, who is struck from a list and who is added, were the whole of what changed that day. The locks were only iron. The names were the thing. I want to set this down plainly because I am old now and the men who could correct me are mostly gone, and because the day deserves a faithful witness rather than the bright, simple story the realm has since agreed to tell itself. The realm says that on the morning the new reign began in earnest, the Crown acted with firmness and wisdom, broke a long corruption, and the people rejoiced. That is true. It is also far too clean. I stood inside it, and from the inside a turning point in the history of a kingdom does not feel like rejoicing. It feels like a door closing somewhere deep in the building, a sound you feel in your chest more than hear, and the understanding, slow, then sudden, that you will never again serve the thing you were sworn to, because the thing you were sworn to has just become something else. Let me go back to the gate and the gray light, and the case set down upon the stones. The escort with the sealed paper paused at the foot of the Chamberlain's stair and turned, for the first time, to look at me. He was perhaps 40, with the smooth, careful face of a man who had spent his life in offices near power without ever being the power himself, and who had, that week, been handed a piece of it. He looked at me the way you look at a clock you are about to decide is running slow. "You are the watch commander here?" he asked. "I am the senior man of this gate, sir," I said. I did not turn my head. A guard at his post answers without turning. The discipline is older than I am and will outlast the both of us. "Sergeant Vael." "Sergeant Vael," he said it as though filing it. "There will be movement through the inner court this morning. officers of the household, some of them. You are to admit no one to the state apartments above the Chamberlain's stair without a name on this list. He did not show me the list. Not the Comptroller, not Lord Aldous, not the Steward of the Robes, no one whose name is not read to you by my office. Is that understood? Now a man may keep his face still and feel the floor move under him, and that is what I did, because what he had just said was not an instruction about a morning. It was the sound of the door I told you of. Lord Aldous Crane was the controller of the household, and had been, in all but name, the master of Harrogate Palace for longer than I had stood its gates. To bar the controller from the state apartments, and to bar him by reading me a list rather than by his own order, was to say that Lord Aldous Crane was no longer the master of anything, and did not yet know it, and was about to find out the way a man finds out he has been locked out of his own house, by setting his hand to a door that will not open. "It is understood, sir," I said. He nodded, satisfied, and went up the stair with the locksmith and the second stranger, and I stood at the Saint's Gate in the gray light, and understood that I had just been made an instrument of something I did not yet fully see, that the first lock to be changed at Harrogate that morning was not made of iron at all. It was me. The watch had always taken its orders down a chain that ran up through the steward, through the controller, through Lord Aldous to the throne. That chain had just been cut here at my gate by a man with a sealed paper, and a new chain run straight from somewhere higher to my hands. The faction that had held the keys of the palace for a generation had, in the space of one sentence, been rooted around. And I, old Vael, the furniture, the man who did not move, had been chosen as the first joint of the new order, because the new order needed someone at the gate who would do exactly as he was told and not be bought. And after 31 years, even men who do not know my face know that of me. It is a strange thing to be honored and unsettled by the same act. I have turned it over for the rest of my life. The bells of the inner chapel rang the quarter. Somewhere above me, in the state apartments, I heard the first dry scrape of a lock being struck from a door it had held shut for 40 years, and I settled my weight and fixed my eyes on the middle distance, and prepared to keep my post through the breaking of the world I knew. I should tell you, before the morning goes any further, what manner of place Harrogate had become, what the locks were really shutting out, because the man with the sealed paper was no zealot, and the new reign was no cruelty, and if you do not understand what had grown quietly in the palace over 30 years, you will think this was a thing done lightly. It was not. It was a thing done late. I had come to the guard, a young man, the year Queen Saralyn's grandfather still kept the throne, when the household ran on 100 small courtesies and 1,000 small understandings, and a young guardsman learned that the courtesies were the visible part, and the understandings were the part that mattered. The understandings were these: that certain contracts for the palace's bread, its coal, its livery, its repair, went to certain houses, that certain appointments below stairs were not earned but granted, and granted by one office, that a guardsman who saw a thing he should not see at a late hour in a far corridor learned, if he was wise, to see less of it the next time, and was rewarded for his blindness with an easy post and a quiet life, and a guardsman who saw too much and spoke of it found himself transferred to the cold gates, the wet gates, the gates where no one came, until he learned or until he left. I had been transferred to the cold gates twice in my first 10 years. I will not pretend I did not understand the lesson. I will only say that I learned it imperfectly, which is the most that can be said for many of us, and the least that can be said for the best of us. The office that held the understandings was the Controller's, and the man who had made it what it was, over 26 years, was Lord Aldous Crane. I want to be fair to him, because he is dead now and cannot answer, and because fairness is the only revenge a guardsman is permitted. Lord Aldous was not a thief in the way the broadsheets later painted him, a fat hand in a golden box. He was something subtler, and I have come to think more dangerous, a man who had so thoroughly persuaded himself that he was the continuity of the palace, that without him the bread would not come and the coal would not come and the great machine would cease, that every favor he steered to his friends, every appointment he sold, every blind eye he commanded, he understood as the necessary grease of a machine only he knew how to run. He did not feel himself corrupt. He felt himself indispensable. And an indispensable man is far harder to remove than a greedy one, because the greedy man can be caught with the gold in his hand, but the indispensable man has woven himself into the very walls, so that to pull him out you must be willing to risk the building. For a generation, no one had been willing to risk the building. Queen Saralyn's grandfather had grown old and tired and had let the understanding stand. Her father had reigned briefly and ill, and had leaned upon Lord Aldous as a sick man leans on a cane. And so the Comptroller's grip had only tightened, year upon year, until the household ran less for the crown than for the office that served it, and a young guardsman entering the service learned the understandings before he learned the drill. Then Saralyn came to the throne. I had watched her grow from a slight, serious girl who used to walk the long gallery with a book held against her chest, into a woman of a kind the palace had not housed in my lifetime, a sovereign who asked questions and remembered the answers, and asked the same questions again a year later to see whether the answers had changed. For 3 years after her accession she had seemed to many, to Lord Aldous above all, to be a quiet queen, a careful queen, a queen content to learn the machine and leave its keeper in place. I had thought so myself. I had stood my gate and watched the household run as it always ran, and thought, she is wise, she will not fight what cannot be moved. I had misread her as badly as Lord Aldous had, and for the same reason. We had both mistaken patience for consent. She had not been content to learn the machine. She had been mapping it. 3 years, while she seemed only to be settling into her reign, she had been quietly learning every joint of Lord Aldous Crane's long dominion, which contracts ran where, which appointments had been sold, which men in the household answered to the Comptroller before they answered to the crown, which guardsmen had been transferred to the cold gates for seeing too much. She had been making her own list. And on the morning the locksmith came, she had finished it, and she had moved, not in a council chamber, not with a speech, but with a locksmith and a sealed paper and a sergeant at a gate, because she had understood the one thing Lord Aldous in all his cleverness had forgotten, that a palace is held not by who sits at its councils, but by who holds its keys and who keeps its doors. Change the locks, root the watch, and the master of the household becomes, in a single morning, a private gentleman standing on the wrong side of a door. I did not know all of this at 6 minutes past 7. I have assembled it since, from years of watching the consequences unfold and from one strange conversation late that I will come to. At the gate, in the gray light, I knew only the shape of it, that the chain of my orders had been cut and rerun, that the Comptroller was to be barred, that the locks were being changed above me, and that the Queen I had thought a quiet woman had just done the loudest quiet thing I had ever seen done inside those walls. And I knew one more thing, which is the thing this whole account is finally about, and I knew it not in my head but lower down, in the place where an old guardsman keeps the truths he cannot prove. I knew that whatever Harrogate had been when I swore my oath to it, a household of courtesies and understandings, of warmth and rot grown together so close you could not cut one without bleeding the other, it would not be that thing again. The morning's iron was not merely removing Lord Aldous Crane. It was removing the whole order he stood for, the long, comfortable, half-corrupt continuity that I had served, and grumbled at and been shaped by, and that had, for all its rot, been the only Harrogate I knew. Something was ending that would not come back. The monarchy I had sworn to was, in the space of 1 gray hour, becoming a different monarchy. The question that filled me, the question that stood at my post with me all that long day, more present than the cold or the ache in my back, was the one every man asks when the ground he stands on shifts. When the thing I swore to has become something else, what is left of my oath? Did I swear to the order that was passing, or to something beneath it that endures? I did not have the answer. I am not certain I have it now, but I learned before the day was out where to look for it. The locksmith's tools rang again, far above. And down at the Saint's gate, the first of the men who did not yet know they had been locked out came walking up the outer drive, in a long dark car fast, the way a man drives when he has heard a rumor and means to reach the truth before it reaches him. It was Lord Aldous Crane. The car stopped short of the Saint's gate in the place where no car was permitted to stop, and the door opened before it had fully halted, and Lord Aldous came up the cobbles on foot with his coat unfastened and his gray hair, usually so exact, lifting in the wind. I had seen him 1,000 times. I had never seen him hurry. The controller of the household did not hurry. Hurrying was for men who feared they were late, and Lord Aldous had spent 26 years being the man others feared to keep waiting. To see him stride up the outer drive with his coat open was to see, already, half the morning's verdict written on his body before a word was spoken. He came to the gate and he stopped, and he looked at me, and for a moment, I will be honest, there was nothing in his face but the old assurance, the look of a man certain the door will open because the door has always opened. We were old acquaintances of a kind, Lord Aldous and I, in the way the master of a household and a long-serving guard are acquainted. He had handed me commendations on 2 occasions and a reprimand on one, and he knew my name, and he had once, years before, paused at this very gate on a winter night and asked after my wife's health when she was ill, and meant it, or seemed to, and I had not forgotten it. There was warmth in the rot, I told you. That is what makes the rot so hard to cut. Vael, he said, open the inner court. I'm wanted above. And there it was, the test of my stillness, the thing this whole life of mine had been a training for, arriving not as a tourist's spit or a drunkard's shove, the small provocations the broadsheets love, but as a quiet order from a man I half respected, an order I had obeyed 100 times, an order that was now, by a sealed paper read to me an hour before, forbidden. My lord, I said, I am unable to admit you to the inner court this morning. He did not understand at first. That is the thing I remember most sharply, that for 2 full seconds he did not understand me, because what I had said did not exist in the world he knew. The controller of the household could not be refused the inner court of Harrogate Palace by the senior man of the Saint's Gate. It was not a thing that could happen, the way water cannot flow uphill, and so for 2 seconds his mind simply declined to receive it, and he gave a small, almost kindly laugh, the laugh of a great man at a subordinate slip. You're unwell, Vael, stand aside. I am well, my lord. My orders are that no one is to pass to the state apartment save by a name read to me from the Lord Chamberlain's office. Your name has not been read to me. I kept my eyes forward. It is easier when you must refuse a man not to look at his face, and I have wondered since whether I kept my eyes forward for discipline or for mercy, his or mine. I am sorry, my lord. The 2 seconds passed and the understanding came into him, and I watched a thing I had never thought to see. I watched Lord Aldous Crane become afraid. Not of me. A man does not fear the lock, he fears what the changed lock means. He understood, faster than I had, he was a far cleverer man than I, whatever else he was, that if the Saint's Gate had been rooted around him, then every gate had, and if every gate had, then the household was no longer his, and if the household was no longer his, then 26 years had ended in the time it takes to drive up the outer drive, and he had not been told. That was the cruelty of it, and the genius of it. She had not summoned him to a council to dismiss him, where he might have argued, marshaled friends, traded threats. She had simply changed the locks, and let him discover his fall at a gate, from a guardsman in the wind. Who gave you these orders? His voice had dropped, the kindliness was gone. Name him. A gentleman of the Lord Chamberlain's office, my lord. I was not given his name. You take orders from a man whose name you weren't given. It was not a question. He was assembling it, the whole shape of his ruin, joint by joint, and using me as the surface to assemble it on. over the controller of the household. Over 26 years. He looked at the palace rising behind me, the long pale front of it, the state apartments where, even now, his locks were being struck from his doors, and something moved in his face that I can only call grief, though a hard, proud grief, a grief that would not bend to ask. "She's done it, then," he said very quietly, and I do not think he was speaking to me at all. "The girl with the book, she's actually done it." I said nothing. There was nothing a guardsman could say that would not be either a cruelty or a betrayal, and so I gave him the only thing my office permitted me to give him, which was my silence and my stillness, the same wall I would have given a tourist or a thug, and which, given to a fallen great man, became something else, became, I have come to believe, a kind of dignity lent to a moment that had none. I would not gloat. I would not pity where he could see it. I would only stand and refuse, and let him keep what a man can keep when he is keeping nothing else, the right to receive bad news without an audience to his face. He understood that too, I think. He was clever to the last. "You're a good man, Vael," he said, and the strange thing, the thing that has stayed with me 30 years, is that I think he meant it, and I think it cost him to mean it, there at the gate of the house he had lost, to the man who was the instrument of losing it. "You always were, more than this place deserved." He fastened his coat slowly, the wind tugging at it, recovering by inches the composure that was the only currency he had left. "Tell them," he stopped. There was no one to tell and nothing to say, and he knew it. "No," he said, "don't tell them anything. They'll know where to find me." He turned and walked back down the cobbles to his car, not hurrying now, walking with the exact, unhurried tread of the controller of the household, because if he could not keep the office he would at least walk away wearing it, and I watched him go, and I will tell you plainly that I did not feel triumph. The realm wanted triumph. The realm wanted the corrupt grandee humbled at the gate, brought low by the honest old guard, and I have let the realm have its triumph because the realm needs its simple stories. But I stood there in the gray wind, and what I felt was the door closing, that low sound in the chest I told you of. And I understood that I had just, with my own refusal, helped to end an age, and that the age I had helped to end was the age that had made me, rot and warmth and understandings and all. The car pulled away down the outer drive. Above me, the locksmith's tools rang once more and were silent. The first lock was changed. And I did not yet know, could not have known, that the breaking of Lord Aldous Crane was the easy part of the day, the part the realm would remember, and that the hard part, the part that would test not my stillness but my oath, was still 4 hours off, and would come not in a long dark car but on foot, small, and would ask of me a question that no list read from any office could answer. But that is to run ahead. The bells rang the half hour. I settled my weight and kept my post, and waited for whatever the new rain would send up the outer drive next. What it sent, through the long middle of that morning, was a procession of small breakings, each one a man arriving in confidence and leaving in ruin, and I stood the gate through all of them, and each one taught me a little more of the shape of what the Queen had done. The steward of the robes came next, an hour after Lord Aldous, and he was not turned away. His name was on the list, read to me by the gentleman from the Chamberlain's office, who came down himself to read it. But he was admitted only to a small ground-floor room and not above, and he went in pale and came out gray, and I understood that he had been one of Lord Aldous's men and had been spared, or perhaps only kept, on terms he had not chosen. Then came the controller's deputy, a smooth young man named Harnett, who had risen fast under Lord Aldous and had treated the gate guards with the particular contempt of a man who knows he is climbing past them, and Harnett's name was not on the list, and I refused him, and Harnett did not take it as Lord Aldous had taken it. Harnett shouted. Harnett threatened. Harnett told me he would have me transferred to the cold gates by nightfall, and I nearly smiled, because the cold gates held no terror for a man who had stood them twice, and because there is a particular sweetness, which I will confess to and not be ashamed of, in being threatened with a punishment by a man who does not yet understand that he no longer has the power to give it. "Do you know who I am?" Harnett said, which is the sentence every falling man says in every age at every gate. I know exactly who you are, sir, I said, and that was the whole of my answer, and it was enough, because we both heard the thing under it, which was, I know who you were. He went away. The gentleman from the Chamberlain's office, who had watched the exchange from the foot of the stair, came over to me afterward, and for the first time the smooth, careful mask of him slipped a little, and I saw that he was tired, and that he was frightened too, in his own way, that this morning was costing him something, that he had been awake all the night before it, that he had not enjoyed reading me the list as I had half assumed a small man enjoys a sudden largeness. "You've handled this well, Sergeant," he said, "better than we hoped. We weren't certain—" He stopped. "You weren't certain the watch would hold," I said, "whether the gates would obey the new chain of orders or the old one." He looked at me, surprised that I had named it so plainly. "No," he admitted, "we weren't. There were a great many gates this morning, Sergeant Vael, and a great many men at them who owed Lord Aldous more than they owed the Crown in the plain accounting of who had given them their posts. We did not know when the morning began how many would open the door for the old master out of habit, or out of loyalty, or out of fear of him, and how many would hold to the list. A great deal turned on it, more than I am permitted to tell you." He paused. "Most held, not all. We will be a long time finding out which gates failed, and why, and what went through them before they were brought to order." And there, in that tired admission at the foot of the Chamberlain's stair, the morning opened up before me into something far larger than one gate and one fallen lord. I had thought, in my smallness, that I stood at the only door that mattered. I understood now that I was one joint of a thing happening at every joint of the palace at once, that the Queen had not changed one lock but 100, had not rooted one chain of orders but the whole nervous system of the household, and had done it in a single coordinated morning precisely, because she could not do it slowly. If she had moved against Lord Aldous one office at a time, he would have heard, and rallied, and fought, and the Warmthandrat would have closed around him to protect itself, because a system defends its own. The only way to break a grip woven into the walls over 26 years was to break it everywhere at once, in one morning, before the walls could close, to change every lock before any key could turn in alarm. It was, I saw, an act of extraordinary nerve. It could have failed. If too many gates had opened for the old master out of habit, the morning would have become a rout the other way. The Queen would have shown her hand and lost. She had wagered the reign on the discipline of the watch, on whether 100 men like me, scattered at 100 doors, owing our posts in the plain accounting to the very order she was breaking, would hold to a list read by strangers over the orders of the masters we had served for decades. She had wagered, in other words, that our oath ran deeper than our habits. That when it came to it, the men of the King's Guard served the Crown and not the Comptroller, the throne and not the household, the thing beneath and not the order that was passing. She had wagered on the very question that stood at my post with me, and I understood, standing there, that I was not merely a witness to the day's great question. I was its answer. Every refusal I had given at the gate that morning, to Lord Aldous, to Harnett, was a vote cast in the only ballot that finally counted, the ballot of whether the oath outlived the order. I had voted, without quite knowing it, with my stillness. We all had, the 100 of us at our 100 doors, and most of us had voted the same way, and so the reign held, and so a kingdom turned. I have thought since that this is the truest thing I know about my service, and the thing the bright simple stories never tell, that the great turnings of a realm do not finally rest on the Queen who conceives them, or the lords who fall in them. They rest on whether the small sworn men at the small doors will hold their oath when the order that fed them is the very thing the oath now demands they break. A monarchy is not held by its monarch. It is held by whether the watch keeps faith with the thing beneath the throne when the throne itself is changing hands. We are the hinge. No one writes it on us, but the door turns on us, or it does not turn at all. The gentleman went back up the stair. The morning wore on toward noon. The breakings continued, smaller now, the last stragglers of the old order arriving to test doors that would not open for them, and I turned them away, one by one, with my stillness and my "I am unable, sir," and felt the age I had served ebbing out of the building like a tide going out, leaving the wet stones bare. And then, a little before noon, when I thought the morning's work was nearly done, and the only thing left was to stand my post through the long, dull afternoon of a changed world, the new rain sent up the outer drive, the one thing I was not braced for, the one arrival no list had named, and no sealed paper had prepared me to refuse or admit. It came not in a car but on foot, through the small pedestrian wicket beside the great gate, where the household's children sometimes slipped in and out unattended because everyone knew them and no one stopped them, a habit of the old warm order that the new locks had not yet thought to change. And it was a child. A small one, perhaps 8 years old, in a dark coat too big for her, with her hair come loose from its plait and her face white, and set with the particular terror of a child who has understood that the grown-up world has tilted, and that no one is going to explain it to her. It was the Princess Maelin, and she was alone. I must explain what that meant, because to anyone outside the walls a princess walking up to a gate is no great matter. Inside the walls it was an alarm of the first order. The royal children of Harrogate, the Princess Maelin, who was then 8, and her brother the Prince Joran, who was 10, did not move through the palace alone. Ever. Not from carelessness but from the iron grammar of the place. A child of the house of Harrogate was always attended, always known, always within the sight of someone sworn. For the Princess Maelin to come to the Saints' Gate on foot, unattended, her hair undone, white-faced, that was not a child wandering. That was a fault line in the very structure of the household, a sign that somewhere in the great coordinated breaking of that morning, a thread had been cut that should never have been touched, and a small person had fallen through the gap. She came to me, the red still figure she had passed 100 times and surely thought of, if she thought of me at all, as part of the gate itself. And she stopped a few feet away, and she looked up at my face, and she did not speak. She was deciding, I think, whether I was a person or a piece of the building. Children are wiser than we credit them. She had felt the morning's tilt as keenly as Lord Aldous had, more keenly, because she had no 26 years of cleverness to armor her against it, only the bare child's knowledge that the grown-ups were doing something frightening, and that the usual order of her days had broken. A guard at his post does not speak. A guard at his post does not move his eyes. A guard at his post is a statue, and the discipline that holds him a statue is not a small thing or a cold thing. It is the visible sign of the whole order he serves, the promise that some things in the realm do not waver whatever else is wavering. On any other morning of my life, I would have held my stillness even for a frightened child, and trusted that her attendant was 3 steps behind, and signaled with my eyes alone for help. But this was not any other morning. This was the morning the locks were changed, the morning a thread had been cut somewhere above, and I knew, with the certainty of 31 years of reading the building, that there was no attendant 3 steps behind, that the child was alone because the morning's great machine had, in breaking the old order, broken for an hour the small, invisible web of sworn people that had always kept a Harrogate child within sight of someone who would die for her. The new locks did not yet know her roots. The new chain of orders had not yet been told who watched the children. In the gap between the old order ending and the new order taking hold, that gap of a single morning, a small person had been left unwatched, and had wandered, frightened, to the only fixed thing she could find, which was the red statue at the gate. And here, reader, is the question the whole day had been carrying toward me, sharpened now to a point and laid against my chest. The new reign had given me an order. No one to the state apartment save by a name read from the list. Hold the gate. Be the instrument. And the order was right, was good, was the very thing that had let a kingdom turn cleanly that morning. To break my post, to leave the Saints' Gate, to fail in the one task the new reign had wagered upon, was that not exactly the failure of discipline that, multiplied across 100 gates, would have undone the Queen's whole brave mourning? Was not my stillness the very thing being tested? Had not I, an hour before, been congratulating myself in my heart on holding my post when other men's posts had failed? And yet, before me stood a frightened child of the house I had sworn to protect, alone in the gap the morning had torn, and every year of my 31, every cold gate I had stood, every understanding I had learned and half rejected, every commendation and the one reprimand, every part of the man I had become rose up in me and said, "This is what the post is for. This is the thing beneath the thing." You did not swear your oath to a gate. You did not swear it to a list. You did not even swear it to the Queen who reigns this morning or the order she is making. You swore it, beneath all of that, to the protection of the house and the realm it serves. And the house is not the state apartments or the offices or the locks. The house, this morning, the whole living house of Harrogate, is standing in front of you in a coat too big for her, alone and afraid, and asking with her eyes whether the world still holds anyone who will not waver. I had spent the whole morning, the whole day, holding my stillness as proof that the order endured. I understood now that there is a deeper proof, and that the deeper proof sometimes requires the stillness to break. The order is the visible faith, but the thing the order serves, the protection of the vulnerable, the keeping of the helpless, the sworn man's body placed between a child and the dark, that is the faith itself. And when the two come into conflict, as they did at the Saints' Gate a little before noon on the morning the locks were changed, the sworn man does not serve the visible faith. He serves the thing it stands for, or his whole life has been a uniform and no oath at all. I broke my post. I have broken it exactly once in 31 years, and I would break it again, and I will tell you precisely how I broke it, because the manner of the breaking is the whole of the honor in it. I did not abandon the gate. A man can do more than one true thing at once if he has the years for it. I brought my rifle down from the shoulder to the order, a small movement, the most restrained motion in all the drill, but to the few household servants watching from the windows it was thunder, because the Saints' Gate sentry had moved, and I went down slowly with my aching old back, onto one knee on the cold cobblestones, so that my face came level with the face of the Princess Maelin, and I was no longer a statue above her but a man before her, and I said, in a voice I had not used at that gate in 31 years, the first soft words I had ever spoken on duty, "Your Highness, you're safe. I have the gate and I have you, and nothing comes through here that I don't allow. Will you stand with me a moment while I send for the right person to take you home?" And the child, who had walked the whole frightened length of that tilted morning looking for one fixed thing in a world that had come unfixed, looked into the face of the old guard kneeling on the stones, and her lip went, and she did not cry quite, but she came the 2 steps to me and put her small cold hand on the red wool of my sleeve, gripping it the way you grip a railing on a stair when the stair is moving, and she held on. And I knelt at my post with the realm's smallest royal hand fisted in my sleeve, and I understood fully, finally, for the first time in my life, what I had been for all those still years. But I had also, in that same moment, done the one thing the new reign had ordered me not to do. I had left the gate unguarded, not abandoned, but no longer a wall. At the exact hour the new order had wagered everything on its gates holding firm. And up the outer drive, even as I knelt, came the next car of the morning fast, and I had no hand on my rifle and a child's fist in my sleeve, and I did not know who was in it, or whether the morning that had broken an old corruption was about to find, in the kneeling figure of old Vael, the one gate that failed. I did not rise. I want that understood, because every instinct of 31 years screamed at me to rise, to put the child behind me, to take up my rifle and become the wall again before the unknown car reached the gate. The training said, you cannot guard a gate on one knee with a child's hand in your sleeve. The training was correct, And I did not rise, because the deeper thing had taken hold of me now and would not let go, and the deeper thing said, "If you tear your sleeve from her hand to take up your rifle, you teach this frightened child that the fixed thing she found was not fixed after all, that even the red statue lets go when the world frightens it." And that lesson, taught to a child of the house on the morning the house changed forever, would be a worse failure than any unguarded gate. So I stayed down. I turned my head, only my head, to watch the car, and I freed my right hand without freeing my left, and I called out, level and loud, the challenge of the Saint's gate in the voice that did carry, the voice that 31 years had built. Halt and declare, the gate is held. The gate is held. 3 words called by a kneeling man with a child's fist in his sleeve, and they were true, because I had understood at last that the gate is not held by the rifle or the stance or even the stillness. The gate is held by the man's refusal to let anything wrong pass him, in whatever posture the moment leaves him. A wall on 2 feet or a guardian on 1 knee. The gate is held by what the man will not permit, and I would not permit that car to reach the child, and so the gate was held, and my voice told the car so before it had stopped. It stopped, and the door opened, and the person who got out was not a fallen lord come to test a lock, nor a thug, nor any provoker the broadsheets would have wanted. It was a woman in a plain dark coat, no older than 40, with gray at her temples and a face I knew as well as I knew the palace stones, because I had watched it grow up. It took me a moment, a long, strange, suspended moment, kneeling there, to place her out of her usual setting on foot on the outer drive, on this of all mornings. And then I placed her, and my breath stopped, and I went to rise after all, because a sworn man does not kneel before his sovereign without her leave. It was the Queen. It was Queen Saralind herself, the girl with the book grown into the woman who had that morning changed the locks of her own palace, come down to the Saint's gate on foot, alone but for a single attendant who hung back by the car, because she had been told, in the chaos of the great coordinated morning, the one thing that could pull a sovereign out of the state apartments on the day she was breaking a generation's grip, that her daughter was missing, that a thread had been cut, that somewhere in the gap between the order ending and the order taking hold, the Princess Maelin had fallen through and could not be found. She had not sent guards to find her child. She had come herself on foot fast down the outer drive, and she had found her, at the Saint's gate, with a small cold hand fisted in the red wool sleeve of an old kneeling guard who had broken his post to hold her. "Don't rise, Sergeant," the Queen said. I had begun to rise, the body obeys before the mind, after 31 years, and her 3 words stopped me halfway, and I sank back to the knee, and the Princess Maelin's hand tightened in my sleeve as her mother came across the cobbles, not running but walking very fast, with the whole morning's iron control visible in the effort of not running, because a queen does not run even to her child, even on the morning she has wagered her reign, and that too I marked, that even now, even here. She held her stillness, the same discipline I had been schooled in, worn at the top of the realm as I wore it at its gate. We were, I understood, the same kind of servant. She served the throne by holding firm where running was easy. I served it by kneeling where standing was the rule. The discipline was one discipline. It only wore different uniforms. She reached us. She did not at first take the child. I have thought about that a great deal. A lesser woman, a softer woman, or a harder one would have snatched the Princess Maelin up at once, and no one could have faulted it. But Queen Saralind stopped a pace away, and she looked down at the picture we made, the old guard on his knee and the small girl gripping his sleeve, and she let it stand for one full breath, because she understood, she of all people understood, the woman who had spent that morning teaching a kingdom that the watch holds when the order changes, exactly what she was looking at. She was looking at the answer to the question she had wagered her reign on. She had wagered that the sworn men of the king's guard would keep faith with the thing beneath the throne, when the throne itself was changing hands. And here at the Saint's gate, in the gap her own great morning had torn, The wager had come due in the smallest and most personal possible coin. Her own frightened child, fallen through the crack, and one old guard who had broken the very order she had given, hold the gate, admit no one, be the instrument, broken it not from weakness but from the deeper faith, to go down on his knee and become a railing for a child to hold in a world that had come unfixed. He told me the gate was held, the Princess Maelin said suddenly, into the silence, in the high clear voice of a child reporting a marvel. And that nothing comes through that he doesn't allow, and he didn't get up, Mama, even when the car came he didn't let go. She said it as the highest praise she knew, and it was the highest praise there is. He didn't let go. The Queen looked at me for a long moment. And then she did a thing that no sovereign of Harrogate had done to a gate guard in living memory. A thing that the few servants watching from the windows would talk of for the rest of their lives. A thing that I have carried as the single proudest possession of my life, and will carry to my grave. Queen Saralind, on the morning she changed the locks of her kingdom, went down in her plain dark coat, on the cold cobblestones of the Saint's Gate, onto one knee, level with me and with her daughter, so that the three of us knelt together on the stones, the sovereign and the guard and the child, and she put her own hand over her daughter's small fist where it gripped my sleeve, and she said quietly, so that only we three heard it, "Thank you, Sergeant. You held the only gate that mattered." And I, who had not wept on duty in 31 years, who had not wept at my own father's funeral, who had taught 100 young guardsmen that the eyes stay forward and dry whatever passes before them. I felt the wet come, and I did not let it fall, because some disciplines are too deep to break even kneeling, but I felt it come, and the Queen saw it come, and she did me the last great kindness of looking away, of giving me my stillness even in the breaking of it. The way I had given Lord Aldous his dignity at the same gate 4 hours before. We are a strange people, we who serve. We guard each other's composure as fiercely as we guard the gates. It is the only tenderness our discipline permits, and it is enough. It seemed, in that kneeling moment on the cobblestones, that the morning had resolved into something whole and good. The corruption broken, the child found, the oath proved. The sovereign and the guard made one in a single gesture on the stones. It seemed the day had given me its meaning and could ask no more. It had not finished asking. The Queen rose and lifted her daughter, and for a moment the morning was only a mother and a child, and I knelt apart and let it be theirs. But over the Princess Maelin's shoulder, as the Queen straightened, I saw the question come back into her face, not the warm question of the gate, but the cold, hard question of the morning's larger work, the question of a sovereign who has just discovered that her child fell through a crack in the very machine she had built to break a corruption. She set the Princess Maelin down, kept one hand on the small, dark shoulder, and looked at me, and the warmth in her was now braided with something flint-hard. "Sergeant Vael," she said, and she knew my name, which startled me. The girl with the book had been mapping the household for 3 years, and I should not have been startled that I was on the map. How did my daughter come to be at this gate, alone on foot? Who had the watch of her this morning? And there it was, the true setback, the thing the warm kneeling moment had hidden for a breath, that the Princess Maelin's being alone was not an accident of the morning's chaos to be smiled over and forgotten. It was a fault, a grave one. Somewhere in the great coordinated breaking of the old order, the sworn web that kept a Harrogate child within sight had been cut, and a child had fallen through, and on any other morning that would have been the scandal of a decade. But this morning it was worse, because this morning the Queen had wagered her reign on the discipline of the watch, and if the watch had failed so badly that the heir's own sister could wander the grounds unseen, then the corruption breaker had, in the very hour of her triumph, exposed a crack in the foundation she stood on. Her enemies, and a queen who changes the locks makes enemies in a single morning, would seize it. They were already, I had no doubt, somewhere in the broken old order, asking each other how the child had been lost, and shaping the question into a knife. And the knife pointed first of all at the watch, at us, At the men of the gates, because the simplest answer to who lost the child was always going to be the guards, and the simplest answer is the one that travels. I knew kneeling there that I could save myself and my men with a single sentence. I could say, "The fault is above Majesty. The household that arranges the children's watch answers to the steward's office, and the steward's office was in chaos this morning by your own order, its chain of command cut at dawn. We of the gates were given one task, hold the doors, and we held them. The child was not ours to watch. She was lost by the breaking you yourself commanded, in the office you yourself rooted around. It was true. It was wholly true. It would have been the cleanest possible defense, and it would have turned the knife away from the watch and toward the very disorder of the Queen's own mourning, and no one could have faulted me for saying it, because a man defends his own. And I did not say it. I did not say it because of a thing I had learned in 31 years that the clever men in the offices never learn. That when a great wrong has happened, and everyone reaches for the sentence that points the blame away from themselves, the realm is not served by the sentence that is true and clean. It is served by the man who steps into the gap and takes the weight, so that the wound can close instead of festering into a war of sentences. The Princess Malin had been lost for an hour. She was found. She was safe. And the question now was not really who was to blame. The answer to that was the mourning. The answer was the price of breaking a corruption. The answer was a tangle no single office could be hung for justly. The question now was whether this crack would be allowed to widen into the thing that broke the new reign, or whether someone would close it with his own body, the way I had closed the gate with mine. So I said the thing that closed it. "Majesty," I said, still on my knee, looking up into the flint-end warmth of her face, "the watch of the gates was given to me, and the gates held. The watch of the princess was given elsewhere, and in the breaking of this morning that watch was cut, as 100 things were cut, by a necessary breaking that you ordered, and that was right to order. No man arranged for your daughter to be lost. The morning arranged it. But a child was lost on my watch, on the watch of the king's guard, of which I am a sworn man, and I will not stand here and parse which sworn man it should have been. She came to my gate. She is mine to answer for because she came to me, and I was here, and I am the king's guard, and the king's guard does not say that was another man's door, when a child of the house is standing frightened at his own. If there is a fault in the watch this morning, Majesty, lay it on me. I have shoulders for it, and then let it be closed, and let no man be hunted for the price of a thing you were right to do." The Queen was silent for a long moment. The Princess Malin looked between us, not understanding the words but understanding, as children do, the weight of them. The single attendant by the car had gone very still. "You would take a fault that wasn't yours," the Queen said slowly, "to keep me from having to find the man whose it was. I would take it, Majesty, because finding that man helps no one and harms the realm, and because this morning you have done a hard and right thing, and a hard right thing should not be paid for in a hunt for a scapegoat. Let the scapegoat be a man who chose it freely and can bear it. That is what the old guard is for." I paused. "I am near the end of my service, Majesty. I have one thing left worth spending, and it is exactly this: the ability to stand under a weight that would crack a younger man's career, and to close a wound with my own name, because I have little career left to lose and a long faith left to keep. Spend me. It is what I am still good for." And the Queen of Eldermoor looked down at the old guard kneeling on the cobblestones of the gate she had changed the locks of that morning, the guard who had broken his post to hold her child, and now offered to break his name to hold her reign. And I watched her understand that she was looking, for the second time in one morning, at the answer to the question she had wagered everything on, that the watch keeps faith with the thing beneath the throne, and that the answer was even larger than she had known. For the watch did not only hold the gates when the order changed. The watch, in its oldest and truest men, would stand under the weight of the change itself, would take the cost of the breaking onto its own shoulders, so that the realm could turn without tearing. "No, Sergeant," she said at last, very quietly. "I will not spend you. A reign that begins by letting an honest old man take a fault that isn't his to make my mourning look cleaner than it was is not a reign worth the locks I changed today. You have just shown me exactly the thing I changed them for." She drew a breath. "I will not have a scapegoat at all. I will have the truth whole, and I will stand under it myself, because I gave the order that broke the watch, and the crack is mine, and a sovereign who will not own her own cracks has no business owning a crown." And in that exchange, the guard offering to take the weight, the queen refusing to let him, both of them reaching for the wound to close it with their own body rather than another's, I understood that the monarchy had not merely changed its locks that morning. It had changed its character. The old order would have found a scapegoat by noon and forgotten him by spring. This new thing, this thing the girl with the book had brought up out of 3 years of patient mapping, would stand under its own weight. And that, far more than the breaking of Lord Aldous Crane, was the turning point in the realm's history that I had felt at 6 minutes past 7, and could not yet name. I could name it now. The monarchy I had sworn to 31 years before had been a thing of warmth and rot grown together, of understandings, of a comfortable continuity that hid a quiet corruption, and managed its faults by hiding them, by transferring inconvenient guardsmen to cold gates, by finding scapegoats and forgetting them. That monarchy had ended that morning, and I had grieved it because it had made me, and a man grieves even the flawed thing that made him. But what was rising in its place? I had just watched it stand on the cobblestones of my gate and refuse a scapegoat and offer to bear its own weight, was a harder, cleaner, more honest thing, a monarchy that would own its cracks, and it asked more of itself than the old one ever had, and therefore it would ask more of us, the watch, and I found that I did not grieve that. A man can grieve the passing of the thing that made him and still be glad of the thing that replaces it. Both can be true. They were both true in me, kneeling on the stones, and I have held them both side by side for the 30 years since. The queen lifted her daughter again, and this time she meant to carry her in, and the morning's larger machine reasserted itself. The attendant came forward, and there were footsteps now on the gravel as the household, having found at last that the child was at the saint's gate, sent its sworn people running to close the web that had been cut. Within a minute there were 4 guardsmen where there had been 1, and a lady of the nursery white with the morning's terror, and the small bustle of a fault being mended. The gap was closing, the new web was knitting over the old. And the Princess Maelin, lifted in her mother's arms, looked back over the queen's shoulder at me as they went up toward the state apartments, and she lifted one small hand, not a wave exactly, but a holding on at a distance, the gesture of a child who has decided that a person is a person and not a piece of the gate, and means to remember him. I stayed on my knee a moment longer than I needed to. Then I rose slowly, the old back complaining, the cobblestones cold through the wool, and I took up my rifle from where it had rested at the order, and I returned it to the shoulder, and I fixed my eyes on the middle distance, and I became the statue again. The whole breaking of my post had lasted, I suppose, 4 minutes. The household windows that had watched it would talk of it for 30 years, and I stood the saint's gate through the rest of that long, changed afternoon as though nothing had happened, because that is the craft, that is the whole of the craft, to carry the largest thing in your life behind a face that shows the gate nothing. But the day's accounts were not yet closed. There remained the matter I have hinted at, the one strange late conversation from which I assembled much of what I have told you, and it is the proper end of this story, because it closed the last thread and answered the last form of the question I had carried since dawn. It came near dusk. The public gates had long since been shut to the small wondering crowds. The outer drive was empty. The gray morning had given way to a clear cold evening, and the lamps had come up along the front of the palace, and I was an hour from the end of my watch when a man came down from the state apartments on foot and crossed the inner court to the saint's gate, alone, and stopped before me. It was the gentleman from the chamberlain's office, the smooth, careful, tired man who had read me the list at dawn. He had aged, it seemed, a year in the day. We had begun the morning as strangers. he the instrument of the new order and I its first joint. We had passed through the long day's breakings together at a distance, and now he came to me at dusk with something in his face that I had not seen there before, which was the look of a man who needs to say a thing and is not sure he has the standing to say it. "Sergeant Vael," he said, "may I stand with you a moment? I find I don't want to go home yet, and I don't want to go back up there, and a man at a gate is good company for that, I think. He doesn't have to talk." "Stand where you like, sir," I said. "The gate's wide." He stood beside me, facing out as I faced out, and for a while he did not speak, and the lamps burned and the cold came down. Then he said, not looking at me, "I was there in the room when she heard the princess was missing. I want you to know what it was, because you carried a piece of it down here at the gate, and you should know what the whole of it weighed." He drew a breath. We had been at it since 4 in the morning, the locks, the lists, the routing of 100 chains of command, the whole of it timed to the minute so that Lord Aldous would learn his fall too late to fight it. It was working. Gate by gate, office by office, the morning was holding. The Queen stood it like you stand this gate, Sergeant. Not a tremor. 3 years of work coming due in 3 hours, and her reign on the table, and she stood it. And then, at 11:30, the word came up that the Princess Maelin could not be found, that her morning attendant had been one of the people caught in the routing, moved, in the chaos, off her usual post, and that the child had slipped the web. He stopped. I said nothing. A guard at his post is good company for that, as he had said. "I have served in the offices near power for 18 years, Sergeant," he went on. "I have seen a great many people in a great many bad hours. I have never seen anything like the next 30 seconds, because for 30 seconds the Queen had a choice that no one else in the room understood she had, and I only understood it later, watching her not take it. She could have kept her seat. She could have sent guards to find the child and held the state apartments and finished the morning's work, which was at its most delicate point, the point where Lord Aldous's people might still have rallied if they'd seen one crack of weakness at the top. That was the cold, correct, sovereign thing. Hold the throne. Let the watch find the child. Do not let your enemies see you run to a nursery in the hour you are breaking them. Half the great rulers in history would have kept the seat. It is even in a hard accounting the right thing. The realm is larger than one child, even a royal one, and a reign half one can still be lost. "But she went," I said. "It was not a question." "She went," he said. "She stood up in the middle of the most dangerous hour of her reign, and she said, 'I remember it exactly. The morning will hold or it won't, but I will not break a corruption in the name of the realm and lose a child in the doing of it and call that a victory. The realm is not an abstraction I am willing to lose a daughter to. If the watch is what I have wagered on, then I will trust the watch to hold the gates while I go and find my child myself.' And she went, on foot, fast, down the back stairs and out, with one attendant, into a morning where any one of 100 rooted and angry men of the old order might have been waiting. She went out into her own broken morning, undefended, because somewhere in it there was a frightened child of her house." He turned, finally, and looked at me. "And she trusted the watch to hold the gates while she did it. She trusted you, Sergeant. Not you by name. She didn't know which gate the child would be at, but you, the watch, the 100 of you. She bet her reign that you would hold the doors of a kingdom while its queen went looking for her daughter. And you did. And more than held it, the one of you the child reached broke his post in exactly the right way at exactly the right moment, the only way that was deeper than the order, and held her." He shook his head slowly. "2 people this morning understood the same thing without ever speaking of it. The Queen and an old gate guard. That the order is in the service of the thing, and not the other way round. That there are hours when you keep the oath by breaking the rule, and the whole art is knowing which hour you're in. She knew it in the state apartments. You knew it at the gate. I have thought all afternoon that that is what changed today, not the locks. That—" We stood a while in the cold after that, the gentleman and I, and neither of us said more for some minutes, because some things are best left to settle in silence, and a gate at dusk is a good place to let them settle. And then he told me the last of it, the thing about Lord Aldous, and I will set it down, because it is the proper closing of the first thread of the day, the one that began with a long, dark car at the gate. Lord Aldous Crane will not be charged, the gentleman said. I should tell you that since you turned him away this morning and may wonder what became of him. The Queen could have charged him. There is enough, the contracts, the sold appointments, 26 years of it, to have made an example that would have filled the broadsheets for a season. The old order would have charged him. The old order loved an example. It was how it managed its conscience, by hanging one man loudly so the rest could go on quietly. He almost smiled. She will not do it. Not from softness, there's no softness in her, you'll have seen that, but because she said a thing in council this afternoon that I'll remember as long as I remember the morning. She said, I will not begin a clean reign with a vengeance. I have taken his power, which was the wrong he did, and his power is the thing the realm needed back. His ruin adds nothing the realm needs, and a great deal it doesn't, a season of blood sport, a faction made into martyrs, a precedent that the way to end a man is to break him in public. I changed the locks to keep him out, not to hang him on the door. Let him keep his name and his house and his liberty. He will live the rest of his life as a private gentleman who was, once, the master of a palace, and that, for a man like Aldous Crane, is a longer sentence than any I could pass. And I thought of Lord Aldous walking back down the cobbles that morning with his coat fastened against the wind, recovering the composure of the office he had just lost. And I understood that the Queen had read him as exactly as I had, that, for such a man, to be quietly set aside, and left to live in the long shadow of what he had been, was a heavier thing than chains. And I understood, too, that this was the new monarchy showing its character again. It would not manage its conscience by hanging one man loudly. It would take what the realm needed, the power, the keys, the locks, and leave what the realm did not need, which was the spectacle of a ruin. The old order broke men to feel clean. The new order would simply take back what had been stolen and let the rest alone. It was harder. It was less satisfying. The broadsheets would grumble that the corrupt grandee had got off lightly. But it was, I came to believe, the deeper justice. The justice that wants the wrong righted more than it wants the wrongdoer destroyed. And it was of a piece with everything else I had watched that day. The kneeling, the refusal of a scapegoat, the Queen who went for her child and trusted the watch to hold the gates. The gentleman pushed off from the gate at last. I've kept you talking, Sergeant, and you'll say a guard at his post doesn't talk, and you'll be right. He settled his coat. I came down here to thank you. The Queen will thank you properly in time, in the way the Crown thanks people. There'll be a thing, a ceremony, a word in the honors. But the Crown's thanks are slow and dressed up, and I wanted to bring you a man's thanks plainly tonight, while the day's still warm in us. You held the only gate that mattered. She said it on the cobbles, and she was right, and I wanted you to hear a second man say it. He paused. What you did this morning, going down on your knee, there'll be men who'll tell you it was a breach of discipline, and in the strict letter they'll be right, and it'll go in some book somewhere, the day Sergeant Vael left his post. Don't let it trouble you. The strict letter is a fine thing for ordinary mornings. This was not an ordinary morning. On the morning the locks were changed, the senior man of the Saints' Gate understood the difference between the rule and the thing the rule serves, and he chose the thing. That's not a breach. That's the whole of why we have you. Good night, Sergeant. Good night, sir, I said. And he went up across the inner court in the lamplight, and I stood the last hour of my watch alone, and the cold came down, and the lamps burned along the changed front of the palace, and I turned the whole day over in my mind the way I have turned it over every day since. When my relief came at the top of the hour, I handed off the gate in the proper form. The words of the handover are old and fixed, and I will not break them even here. And I walked back across the inner court to the guardroom under a clear, cold sky, an old man at the end of an ordinary watch on the day a kingdom turned. And I want to tell you what I understood by the time I reached the guardroom door, because it is the answer I had been looking for since 6 minutes past 7, and it is the only thing in this long account that I am certain of. I had asked at dawn, when the thing I swore to has become something else, what is left of my oath? I had feared, watching the old order ebb out of the building, that my oath had been to the order that was passing, to the warm, flawed, comfortable Harrogate that had made me, and that with its passing my oath was a thing without an object, an old man's loyalty to a country that no longer existed. That is the fear of every man who serves a thing long enough to watch it change, that he has given his life to something that is gone, and that he is left holding an oath to a ghost. I was wrong, and the day had shown me how I was wrong, and the showing of it is the gift the day gave me that I have carried ever since. My oath had never been to the order. The order was only the form the thing took in my time, the locks, the lists, the understandings, the warmth and the rot. Orders pass. Forms change. Locks are struck off and new iron fitted. A queen who seems quiet maps a corruption for 3 years and breaks it in a single morning, and the Harrogate of my swearing is gone by noon, and a different Harrogate stands in the evening lamplight. If my oath had been to the form, then yes, my oath was a ghost, and I was a foolish old man guarding a gate to a vanished country. But my oath had never been to the form. It had been to the thing beneath the form, the thing the locks and the lists and the watch and the whole great machine existed to serve, which was the protection of the house and the realm, the keeping of the helpless, the standing of a sworn man between the vulnerable and the dark. That thing had not changed. That thing does not change. It was the same that evening as it had been at my swearing 31 years before, the same it had been 100 years before that, the same it will be 100 years after the last man now living at Harrogate is dust. The monarchy had changed, its character, its conscience, its locks, its very soul, all changed in a single gray morning, and I had felt the change in my chest at dawn and grieved it and been right to grieve it. But the oath had not changed, because the oath had never been to the monarchy of that morning. It had been to the thing the monarchy is for. And that thing is older than any reign, and outlasts every reign, and is exactly the same in the old corrupt warm Harrogate that died at dawn and the hard clean honest Harrogate that rose by dusk. The duty to stand, and to keep faith, and to put the sworn body between the child and the dark. That is what endures. Not the reigns pass. Not the orders are changed with a locksmith and a sealed paper before breakfast. Not the locks, not the lists, not the warm understandings, not even the names on the list. What endures is the post, and the oath, and the duty, the bare granite thing under all the changing forms, the thing a sworn man stands upon when everything else he served is being struck off the door above his head. I had thought at dawn that the ground was shifting under me. By dusk I understood that I had only been mistaking the form for the ground. The form had shifted violently in a single morning. The ground had never moved. The ground does not move. It is the one fixed thing, and it is the thing I had been standing on, without quite knowing it, for 31 years. The same thing the frightened Princess Malin had reached for at my gate, when she came looking through a tilted morning for one fixed point, and found it in an old red statue who would not let go. I served 11 more years after the morning. The locks were changed. I saw the new Harrogate grow into itself, harder than the old, cleaner than the old, and, I will say it plainly, better than the old, though I grieved the old to the end and make no apology for the grieving. A man may love a flawed mother and still be glad his children are raised more honestly than he was. I saw the Princess Malin grow from the white-faced child at my gate into a young woman who never once in all those years passed the saint's gate without finding my eyes. Whatever the company she walked in, and giving me not a wave, the protocol would not have it but a small steadiness of the gaze, a holding on at a distance, the same gesture she had made over her mother's shoulder on the morning of the locks. She remembered. Children remember the fixed thing. It is perhaps the most important work we do, we who stand the gates, to be, for one frightened child in one tilted hour, the fixed thing she will reach for, and to not let go. There was a ceremony in time, as the gentleman had promised, slow and dressed up, as the crown's thanks always are. The queen put a medal on my chest in a room full of people who mostly did not know what it was for, and said a few formal words, and I stood at attention and showed the room nothing, as the craft requires. But as she pinned it, she said, under the formal words, so quietly that only I heard, the same thing she had said on the cobblestones. The only gate that mattered, Sergeant. And I have valued those 5 murmured words above the medal, above the honors, above everything the crown's slow dressed-up thanks could give me, because they were the true thing, said plainly twice, by the one person in the realm who knew exactly what had happened at the Saints' Gate on the morning she changed the locks. I am old now and long out of the service, and I sit by a window in the evenings and turn the day over as I have told you, and I am at peace with it, which is more than most men can say of the great turning point they happen to be standing inside of. The realm has its bright simple story, the corruption broken, the people rejoicing, and I have let it keep that story, because the realm needs its bright simple stories and I am too old to argue with a kingdom. But this is the true one, set down faithfully by the man who stood inside it, and its truth is this. On the day the crown changed the locks of its own palace, a veteran of the king's guard felt the monarchy he had sworn to end forever before breakfast, and grieved it, and was right to grieve it, for it had truly ended, and what rose in its place was a different thing with a different soul. But he learned, before the day was out, that his oath had outlived the monarchy it was sworn under, because his oath had never been to that monarchy, or to any monarchy, or to any reign or order or set of locks that could be changed in a morning. His oath had been to the thing beneath all of those, the duty, the keeping of faith, the sworn body between the child and the dark, and that thing endures every turning of the realm untouched, the one fixed point a frightened kingdom can reach for in a tilted hour, exactly as a frightened child once reached for an old red statue at a gate, and found it would not let go. The locks were changed, the reign turned, the monarchy became in a single gray morning a thing it had never been before. And the post stood, and the oath held. And the old guard kept his faith with the only thing that does not change, and went back to his gate, and fixed his eyes on the middle distance and stood.